Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, it's great to have our good friend David Cranmer Underdown back for a hour discussion. It's always so fascinating, and I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this. Haven't seen you since August, David, so welcome back.
It's good to be back. I feel like a lot of exciting things are happening in Michigan right now, so it's a good time to reconnect.
Absolutely, and let's put in a plug for George Webb's charrette going on up there. And where is he doing it? Novi, or where is he?
Well, he's kind of I think looking with Aaron trying to find a new studio location, but
Right.
I mean, as far as the visits, they've been in Novi, Ann Arbor today. They were up in Saginaw, I believe, Warren. So
Yeah.
yeah, they've been really hitting the Midwest, not just Michigan, also Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Sure, and I know that he'll be heading to Butler for President Trump's return.
Right.
So, all the best to all of our George Webb followers, and more power to you, to all of you. And I've worked with George for a number of years now, and it's just a tremendous honor to be able to be there when he reveals all of this stuff that I don't see how he finds it, but it works together very, very well, and it's really been an amazing journey. So thanks, George.
I,
Mm.
I I concur. I feel like I've learned so much from him, also from you and Mark Kulak, Professor Hamoto, Peter Duke. Other people have been really, added really big pieces and a lot of information. And I feel like it's a good group effort.
Absolutely, absolutely, indeed. And well, let's get into what I wanted to talk about today. I guess actually it was what I was talking about in the last couple of shows. The the doctrine of plausible deniability, which I've heard of it. I knew it existed, but I thought it was an internal CIA thing. That maybe the CIA just has this rule inside of itself that you have to be able to hide what you do from the public, uh, if you're breaking the law. But in fact, this is part of the U.S. executive branch, um, um, National Security Council Memorandum 10/2. And I suppose that most people have had a look at it by now, but the gist of it is that things that the CIA wants to do are assigned to an Office of Special Projects, which has its own rules within it for covert operations. And that one of those rules is that you can do things like support guerrilla warfare, overturn countries, do all the skull and dagger things that you think that maybe James Bond does under his license to kill. But what we really have is, in bureaucratic language, what turns out to be a license to kill for people that are doing CIA special projects. And then the government, if you do get found out, that the government will step in and deny it. And projecting from that, you have this incredible ability to do all kinds of illegal things, such as sabotage. I mean, sabotage. How broad a term is that? And when you consider that the sole person that's making the decision to do these operations or not is the director of Central Intelligence, Alan Dulles, for the whole 50s and up to 1961, that the people of his mindset are going to stretch all of these words as far as they need to. And that's why I think, if you look at MK Ultra, which is sabotaging people's minds, sabotaging their health, and the health alteration committee that we associate with my dad's time in the early 60s, these are things that flow from that very document signed in 1948, NSC 10/2. And what it develops into is something I'd like to read from a recent book I just got. This is called The Dirty Tricks Department. It's all about Stanley Lovell, the OSS, and the secret warfare in World War II. But it goes further into the 60s. And you might be familiar with Operation Midnight Climax, which was run by the CIA and the Bureau of Narcotics, a brownstoning operation in San Francisco that was run by a guy named George White. And this is a little bit of a paragraph from that book about George White. When the CIA terminated Operation Midnight Climax in the 1960s, White wrote Gottlieb, Gottlieb, the person that hired him, an appreciative letter of sorts. Gottlieb insisted that it was nothing more than, quote, a flight of poetic license, but it nevertheless reveals White's attitude toward his assignment. Quote, I was a very minor missionary, he wrote, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest, unquote. Well, I guess the All-Highest was Alan Dulles, who probably thought that he was the next thing to God. Nevertheless, when we consider the creation of basically evil characters like George White, who just loves to do evil things and get away with it, this thing is a mess. I mean, so what I've decided is to appeal to people to write to their Congress people to say, look, no wonder nobody can tell us what's going on. There's plausible deniability. If people told what was going on, they'd be breaking the law, and so they can't do it. And then when somebody is going to break the plausible deniability, maybe somebody that wants to just be a whistleblower, then they can get quashed, and the government will cover the whole thing up. Now, doesn't that resonate with exactly what we've been facing for the years we've been trying to uncover things? Is that, even when you get to what looks like a good source, then things just dry up. And what about the case in point, the Butler event that George Webb has been studying so assiduously, and how do you get to the bottom of something when everybody is sworn not to tell you, or else they will probably suffer some very bad consequences, which include, having a visit from George White. So, and then how does that make me feel about my dad, because this TINSAS 2 was a top secret memorandum. Nobody was allowed to know about it until it was released to the public in 2010. And with no fanfare, so I didn't know about it until Mike Benz alerted me to it. And the last thing I'll say is everybody should watch the Mike Benz Hillsdale College speech, which he has on his Twitter or X page, pinned at the top. It's a 40-minute speech, and it's really worthwhile. So, and that's where I have come from to present this to the world, that we have a solution here, and that is to repeal 10/2 and to abolish the plausible deniability doctrine, and then people will be able to speak freely and probably get a absolution from their sins because they thought they were acting under the law. Well, that's my speech. David, you've been working on this too. Where would you like to start?
Well, there's a lot of places in this. We were kind of talking before the show about what we were going to talk about, and the military doctrine is very close to home in Michigan, and the reason I say that is the excuse me, the Horace Roland Gaither, who was a man that was working at the MIT Rad Lab during.
I'm sorry. For some reason, maybe it's me, but I thought you said the horse throwing Gaither.
The horse throwing Gaither, Horace Gaither. No,
No,
he's very
Horace
close.
Rowan, which
Horace,
is a kind of a horse, right? Gaither.
yeah, a Rowan, and then Gaither. He was the deputy director of the Rad Lab during World War II, and then he was brought into some critical positions to do war doctrine, and one of the places he did it was the Ford Foundation, and
Mhm.
he was also a creator of the Rand Corporation and MITRE, which is another very important military contractor that was associated with the Lincoln Laboratory of MIT. And so he's very involved in these machinations. And then in the period that you were talking about before the Dulles period, or I'm sorry, when the Dulles period comes to be under Eisenhower, the Secretary of Defense um, that's working with him doing the New Look program is named Charles Wilson. And Charles Wilson had been recruited from General Motors. He was the chairman of General Motors. So he was somebody that came in and was working on this New Look doctrine with Eisenhower, and then of course with Dulles, Foster Dulles, and Allen Dulles as in those positions. So that's why when I wrote that this 10/2 that George Keenan wrote is going to be so linked with these guys is because he was the deputy Soviet ambassador under Averell Harriman during the war, and Harriman was in a lot of key places because he was not only a diplomat. He was also involved with the Union Bank, the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. His dad was one of the massive railroad infrastructure builders of our country. His sister was a founder of the eugenics, register at Cold Spring Harbor. And he was having an affair with Winston Churchill's daughter-in-law during World War II. So he's an intriguing character that is really important because not only is this Harriman pedigree tie in with the Dulleses, you also have the SACO, the Silesian American Company, which was a mining operation during World War II that was owned by all of our key characters. It's owned by the Anaconda Copper Corporation, which is Guggenheim, Morgans, Rockefellers, and then you have the Averell Harriman Company are the two owners of SACO. And SACO is the organization that is doing espionage with Allen Dulles when he's in Switzerland during World War II. Allen Dulles was also the man that was the whistleblower on the Protocols of Zion in Constantinople in 1921. So this plausible deniability, there's a long legacy of false flagging, of Zionistic or anti-Semitic attacks, or racial motivations for military actions and things like that. And so these things are to me are all together in these doctrines of the 10/2, where you're what you had done in your reading before, which was so interesting, was talking about this this post World War II era where they are getting involved in election operations in Greece and in Italy, and how this kind of success is now the model that says, look how great we did here. We need to, make a model of this and now replicate it everywhere. And our charge is we're fighting anti-communism because the Russians have invaded Czechoslovakia in '48, and so you have a communist influence into Europe. So that is the pretext that you need to have defense against the spread of communism, and then you see all of these anti-communism organizations sprout up, including National Security Act 1947, which, as we are talking about, a big pretext for it is the prevention of spread of communism.
Yeah.
It becomes our doctrine for the Cold War.
And let me add this, which again I think I want to attribute to Mike Benz, but this is the analogy to today, in that when the CIA, and it is George Kennan that's really running this, says as a matter of policy, we have to consider the idea of a communist victory in Italy as the end of the democracy that we're trying to generate in Italy. And so, if we, in this first election, allow the communists to win, then there will never be another election. That will be the end of democracy. So, democracy requires free and fair elections, but you can't have them if the communists are going to win. And so that justified, in their minds, the use of the mafia, bombing, Operation Gladio, which follows, the Red Brigades, the terror campaign in Italy, and that happens just 2 weeks before they put 10/2 into the executive orders. And so exactly what you said. And now what's going on with our election? Well, the Democrat side says that President Trump is a threat to democracy. That if President Trump is elected, then there won't be any more democracy in the United States. Therefore, we have to use our plausible deniability means and whatever else we need to in order to defeat President Trump. And that is why we don't know what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. That is why we don't know who hired Mr. Ruth. That is why all of this stuff is covered up. And so Congress, unless the Supreme Court wants to jump in, but Congress is the place where our laws are made. So our Congress has got to be held to its feet to the fire and to reverse this plausible deniability, or we're going to keep turning around seeing our fellow citizens assassinated, either with a gun or with a cancer or with whatever means necessary, quote unquote. So I'm up in arms about this. This is something that we can do, and to force our Congress to face the fact that, hey, World War II is over now. You know, and again, George F. Kennan is the one that supports Henry Kissinger's food policy, in which basically they're going to give crap food they're going to take over the agriculture of the world. They're going to feed crap to people so their lives are short. And they're going to be ruthless about it, because if they don't be ruthless about it, then with the United States having only so much percentage of the population of the world, sooner or later the rest of the world will overtake us and take away our beautiful democracy forever. So because there is perceived the idea that somehow, somewhere, our democracy is under threat, that we can do whatever the hell George White wants to do to get rid of people that are meddlesome to the high priests of our elites. So it's a disgusting situation in which I'm glad to be part of revealing it, and I don't know what else to say on that subject right now, except for all of these things. You know, you mentioned Horace Rowan Gaither, the Ford Foundation. The other point I want to make is you mentioned how Avril Harriman and Alan Dulles were working together in World War II and subsequently. This is the Uniparty.
It is, yeah.
Avril Harriman is a Democrat. And, you know, all of the people that follow Avril Harriman in the State Department are Democrats. And nevertheless, when it comes to foreign policy and the use of covert actions, they're on this exact same page. And that tells us a lot, I think.
And it also tells you that whenever people talk about Union Bank and Brown Brothers Harriman, even though the name Harriman is in the name of the organization, they always go to the Bush family and the Walker family. But you should, but you just have to remember that they're not separate. They were roommates. Prescott Bush was Bunny Harriman's roommate at Yale. They were roommates together. So they're, and their E.H. Harriman was, business partners with Columbus Castings, with Sam Bush, and with, the whole Columbus, Ohio. When we talk about, the the controversies of, the Les Wexner and all those things, Columbus. But it's not just that. It's also the Rickenbacker Air Force Base and the Defense Supply Center, which is, in the McDuff story, the DSC in Columbus, which was Division 5. That was there. And so, and again, like for me, I always look at like the long-term history and that part of the world. The reason why I feel like Southern Ohio and Pittsburgh, these areas we're talking about, are so interesting is, one was because it was a national goal to get our capital to the Ohio River, to the Mississippi River, and they wanted a logistics network, and that eventually manifested as the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and they built the suspension bridge in Huntington, and that was the big connection. And so that's how, like, I look at like how these different organizations and groups of interest come together. Because if you look at the First World War, when you had the War Industry Board, you had Bernard Baruch was the head of that organization, but the original head of it was the president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and then he was resigned, and then Baruch took over, and then of course that's where like Sam Bush comes in as the small arms, representative for the War Industry Board. And this is how you can see the Bush and the Brown brothers and the Union Bank people coordinating with this power group of the Bernard Baruchs and the Paul Warburgs of the Kuhn and Loeb companies that are, doing Union Pacific Railroad deals with E.H. Harriman and with not Adam Schiff, Jacob Schiff is doing these railroad deals with E.H. Harriman. So you can see this long legacy of the kind of the odd connection of sort of this like skull and bones, blue blood, group that, because Harriman was, all the Harriman, the Harrimans were all skull and bones guys. And so it's, it's just interesting that I don't know. I mean, it's with some of these kind of like historical, I guess like occultic groups or whatever, that I don't like. I try to understand them, but there's a lot of crossovers that don't make sense, and that I feel like they tell you like, if you're this religion, you can't become a Freemason, or if you're this or that. And I feel like those are distractions a lot of times, and it's more important to look at the familial connections and the business connections, and then like try to understand how like the interests of, say, Woodrow Wilson, and how he positions these Baruch and Eugene Mayer and Paul Warburg as these, the triumvirate of World War I, and then having a big influence in the Versailles Treaty, which is the end of World War I, and how, how those people came together. And so I don't piece out, the the Republicans are the skull and bones guys, and they're the Brown brothers guys, and they're the Nazi collaborators. There's a lot of other parties involved, and that's what, we try to uncover and show that, that there is, that they're using tactics that we're talking about. They have plausible deniability, and they're legally allowed to lie, and they can even lie in, I believe, if you have a certain security clearances, you're allowed to lie in a courtroom if it's a national security issue. So the rules that, I mean, just understanding the game the rules of the game, the players, what the moves are, what the illegal moves are that some people are allowed to use that other people can't. It's important to try to unmask that stuff.
Yeah, it sure is. And now that we have a legal point to fix upon, that this 10/2 memo is the the match that lit the flame that has created this firestorm of illegal activity. I mean, drugs are covered under it. The whole Golden Triangle thing, the whole importation, all of the banks, the Nugan Bank, the BCCI, all of it is covered under 10/2. And if we could get rid of 10/2, which the American people would do, because basically, as George F. Kennan stated the problem, we have a population of people that think there's a difference between peace and war. And that's his problem, because he thinks that war has to go on. This is the permanent war party justifying itself and saying, we cannot allow uh, peace to happen. That I think is the real motivating factor of the military industrial complex, is to, as long as they can keep war going, then they win, and they keep raking in the money and growing more and more powerful as they build out their technocracies. It's interesting, to think, are there just another question, probably, Coral, maybe a little bit off topic, but I do notice that there are two different teams going on right now, like say Kissinger and Brzezinski. Kissinger kind of maybe in the middle, but more on the Republican side. Brzezinski more on the Democratic side, and but they would have their own puppets that they would manipulate. Like Brzezinski would manipulate Carter, and Kissinger would manipulate Nixon, and but it's, these guys are behind the scenes. It's a uniparty. They're both working to achieve the same goal, which is an economic domination of the world, a way to make the entire world economy work as one, and the wealthy get wealthier, and the poor gradually die off, just like the idea of the British Empire. And uh, you know the people that say that they want to return us to feudalism are not wrong in my mind. I think they want us uneducated, and easily led, and people that are sheep, that'll just roll up their sleeves whenever their superiors tell them to.
Yeah, I'm it's one thing that that is interesting to look at is the thing that the Glomar Explorer. Have you seen that before?
No, it's
Are you
that.
familiar with it? Okay, so the Glomar principle ties in. So the Glomar principle is the plausible deniability principle, and they built a naval vessel for Howard Hughes. It was a special DARPA project, and it was intended to recover a Russian nuclear submarine that had sunk, I believe, off the coast of Alaska. And it was a very top secret project. But I think it's always interesting because whenever I think of Howard Hughes, I always, of course, think about the 72 Watergate, when you had the Robert Mullins company that was hired by Howard Hughes, which is, Bob Bennett, who's, had worked with what's his name? Bush's, the Karl Rove, as a high schooler. And then you also had Resorts International also is hiring Howard Hughes, or Howard Hughes is hiring out. And then you have this Glomar Explorer, which is a straight up like DARPA CIA project that is also involved with Howard Hughes. So always interesting with the plausible deniability in this Glomar Explorer, because it does tie into the Nunn-Lugar story, because it involves Russian nuclear material they're trying to recover, and then later the DTRA and the Nunn-Lugar Act are to handle the material, the dangerous um, materials from Russia.
The other big topic that I was hitting upon in the past week is Christian Zionism, and the idea that the what looks to me has British fingerprints all over it. This Schofield Bible, uh, apparently printed in the millions by Oxford University Press for distribution to American Christians. And, that happened in the early 19 teens, 1908 to 1917, and just in time for the war. A version of the Bible that is the King James Version, but with very explanatory notes. The explanatory notes are written uh, to create a narrative that benefits the British Empire. And part of it, and the way that it benefits the British Empire is to convince American Christians that Israel has to be supported no matter what. That there are a number of statements in this Bible that are quoted frequently, and that is that you have to support Israel because Israel has to be there in the end times for Jesus to return and to initiate the 1,000 years of peace and harmony and wonderful, the great world that everybody is hoping to see. That changed American Christianity 180 degrees because, know, for instance, the Catholic Church with Pope Pius IX, very anti-Semitic. Most of the popes anti-Semitic. And Americans that would be anti-Semitic would include uh, most people that are part of the know-nothings, the ones that just have a general fear of strangers. But in creating that Bible, we have a tremendous effect on our foreign policy. And the person that apparently financed it and facilitated it was none other than the Zionist, Samuel Untermyer. So maybe you could refresh our memory about who Samuel Untermyer is and what significance that has in terms of the plausible deniability things we've been talking about, because support of Israel in a secret way seems to be a large part of our history as well.
He's an important character. So he was most well known as a lawyer from New York. People that like there's the Son of Sam murders, happened in the Untermeyer Park in.
Now, I have to say, I got a video this morning on Twitter from somebody that claimed to be an expert on it and said, no, that's not accurate. So just a footnote there. I don't know if this person is believable or not, but perhaps you can.
Okay, well, my understanding is that the Untermeyer Park was originally owned by the presidential candidate. What's his name that lost in the 76 election? Samuel Tilden, whose family was they were medicinal cannabis growers. So
I
that's
didn't know
something to.
that.
Oh yeah, they were
Well,
the cannabis
I'd
kings.
vote for him today.
Come on, that's why Samuel Untermeyer was growing all the orchids. He was the orchid. He had like the 80 people working at his orchid park. And remember who else was an orchid lover? They used to grow them in the Negev desert. They could tell the radiation levels based on trimming his orchids.
Was his name Angleton?
It went by Jim. Yeah, Mr. Jim Angleton was also an orchid lover, which is intriguing. But anyway, so what I understand was that Samuel Tilden died. His estate became the New York Public Library, was combined with the Astor Trust. They made the New York Public Library, which what's his name? Chuck Schumer's wife is the leader of, I believe, the New York Public Library. And so those were combined. Jenny Jerome, she had at the Manhattan Club, she had introduced the Manhattan cocktail as a toast to Samuel Tilden for busting the canal ring. And she, of course, was the mother of Winston Churchill. And also, intriguingly, her dad, Leonard Jerome, was the business partner of August Belmont, who was a very important Reconstruction banker that fits right into the story we're talking about as far as the Zionist influence, because he was the Rothschild's agent in North America, and he was so he and Leonard, they started Jerome Park, the racetrack, and then the Belmont Stakes, which people know that horse racing fans, that's the Belmont Stakes. And of course, Churchill Downs is where the Kentucky Derby is. And then the Preakness is Bayou in Baltimore. So all those things are interesting. But anyway, so the Untermeyers, so Samuel Untermeyer was the lawyer who's originally from the South. He was a Southerner. He comes up to New York.
Virginia, I think. Wasn't he?
Virginia, that's right. He was from Richmond. Richmond, I think.
Okay.
Or no,
No, I thought he was out in Lynchburg area.
I'm mixing Bernard Baruch. Bernard Baruch's dad is the one that did the Egyptian building at, Richmond, University of Richmond. Their medical school is like an Egyptian pyramid. That was Bernard Baruch's dad was the one that did he did all of the, like, what they call them, the water cure centers and the bathhouses and stuff. That was like Bernard Baruch's dad's public health contribution. But Samuel Untermeyer was he was law partners with Lewis Marshall and with the Guggenheims of the mining and rocketry interests, because of course the Jet Propulsion Lab was originally the GALEC, which is the Guggenheim Aeronautical Institute of Technology. So you have the Guggenheims, the Marshalls, and Untermeyer's working together. Untermeyer was the the representative of Kuhn and Loeb and the Warburgs for the Federal Reserve Act. He was the the lawyer for the Riggs Bank, which is the 9/11 bank, and also the Pinochet bank. And then they were also the leaders of the movement against Henry Ford. If you remember, the Dearborn Independent and the International Jew and the Protocols of Zion, the newspaper in Dearborn, that was Lewis Marshall was the one that led the movement against Henry Ford. And of course, that's ties right into Allen Dulles, because Dulles is the one that discovered it was a forgery in Constantinople when he was a Foreign Service officer in 1921. So he discovered that. So you have these intrigues of the Ford family, the Lewis Marshall, and then of course you had the and then the last part of that, which ties personally, and I know, like, my goal is to try to show how the personal things help other people to understand. And the newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, was the editors of it had come from Detroit News, and that was the Scripps newspaper, and that was the newspaper that George Golfbooth was the editor of. And so that's like why when I have these my personal curiosities about the Health Alteration Committee, my conclusions are that it's the people closest to my family that were so it's always those kind of things are I'm working on to try to make it more.
I know exactly how you feel. I have so much trouble talking about things.
It makes you look crazy, because first of all, to be like being like, oh well, your great grandfather and was your great grandmother blames Henry Ford for her husband's death, right? Well, that's a ridiculous thing to say until you're like, well, but the the person that she was they had the same mentor, they had the same boss. Alex Dow hired Henry Ford at Detroit Edison and then brought my great grandpa from Cornell. So it's not like they were some, you know, wouldn't have crossed paths. I mean, Dow was the man that introduced Thomas Edison to Henry Ford. So there is real connection there.
I was just, I've started thinking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt again, which is always an adventure. But it occurred to me to check if he was a chess player, because I started to think that he is one of those people that thinks that he can kind of manipulate the world and kind of keep everything under control, and that's why, I mean, obviously he led a lot of people in his administration to be very close to communist and socialist ideas, and a lot of the programs that he created, some which turned out to be ruled unconstitutional, were of a socialist slash communist nature. Nevertheless, he was a very much of an elitist, a person who was in favor of continuing the existing elite order, uh, and therefore, I think he was kind of like he could manage things. But anyway, I looked it up, and it turns out, oh yeah, he was a great chess player, and he had regular games with Henry Ford.
Doesn't surprise me. The thing is, his grandpa was Russell and Company. Warren Delano was a
Yeah.
Russell and Company partner. That same man is the one that founded Delano, Pennsylvania, with Asa Packer, who was he was the founder of Lehigh University, but he was also the person that took in Joseph Seligman, and Seligman is the man that did the greenbacks after he won the greenback
Oh,
under U.S. Grant.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then Joseph Seligman's son became a professor at Columbia, and he was the director of the literary club. It's like philosophical club or something. It's a Columbia. It's a very old
Yeah,
Columbia.
one of those long names that had a kind of a Greek name.
Yeah, and it was like Henry Murray Butler founded it, and then who was a good friend of FDR, of course, and then it was also the other intrigue in there was so the Seligman was the professor of it, and then the two people in the same class was Bill Barr's dad, Simon Pellenbar was in it, and there's only 10 people in this, and then the other person in there was Hermann Joseph Muller, the one that ended up living next to my grandparents.
Drosophila Muller, huh?
Who was the mentor of James Watson, that was of Watson and Crick, that was the first head of the Human Genome Project. Hermann Joseph Muller was also the mentor of Carl Sagan. They were all University of Chicago people under Muller, and then then he ended up going to Bloomington and was doing God knows what in Bloomington. But as far as the the other characters around there, like that's the other thing. Like when you're talking about Operation Midnight Climax, the person that wrote the seminal books on human sexuality was Alfred Kinsey, and he was also a neighbor of my mom. He lived 3 houses away, also a neighbor of Hermann Joseph Muller. And the Pomeroy, I forget his first name, his wife was my grandma's neighbor in the nursing home. They were part of the Kinsey books. They were authors of the Kinsey books, and also he was the founder of the I forget what it's called. It's like Human Sexuality Clinic. It's in San Francisco. It's a world famous human sexuality, LGBTQ kind of leader is in this Pomeroy, and that was the next door neighbor of my mom or grandma in the nursing home, and she used to. I love my grandma. She used to give the eye roll for Miss Pomeroy when she'd go by. She knew all the stories, but those were the people. And then the other ones that were involved in that type of activity was the Timothy Leary, and Leary was originally working under the umbrella of the the Kaiser family, Henry Kaiser, who was a big industrialist that was working with when Joe Kennedy was running the Maritime Shipping Board, and they were doing the Liberty ships. They worked together to create the logistics network in Oakland that did the Kaiser shipyards, and that was Edgar Kaiser, the son. He actually ended up running the Kaiser Fraser auto plant in Willow Run in Ypsilanti, Michigan. After, and he's the one that moved to Underdown Road in Barton Hills, Michigan, which is the Alex Dow street that where my dad's family all grew up and everything, and that was the one that died in the car crash that the wife blamed Henry for.
Yes, and I, I am sorry for all the losses in your family. And when I hear you tell these stories, I feel like you and I have something very strong in common, and that is, in my case, it was this: when I was 18 and my dad died, and my mother didn't have a job; she was a stay-at-home mom, and the income disappears, and what are we going to do? And of course, Uncle John, the uncle of my father, who had tried to mentor him into the world of white shoe law firms and Wall Street, which he walked away from, offered my mother some support. And my mother said no. And she told me, she said, I just don't trust them. I don't trust the O'Loughlin's. I don't, and so that coupled with another incident, which is that my dad's best friend in childhood, Dr. Russo, he became a very famous and wealthy physician in Connecticut. And, there are a number of hints that he had connections with some underworld, serious, high-level underworld stuff. I didn't know it at the time, but I think my mother also suspected that. So when he offered to support, my mother said no, and so we made it with what we had, but it was I think one of my mother's most wise decisions was not to let them start becoming part of my life, because they could have drawn me in. They could have found a use for me. And I think you've got an angel too, David, that has kept you out of all this stuff. And whoever it is, I say, God bless him. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, it's similar. I mean, the thing is like even like with my grandpa Underdown, who was the lived in town. Like we didn't see him that much, because after my grandma died, which was when my dad was a freshman in college, he remarried right away. And the woman he married was, also has an intriguing story. And, she's the one that was her best friend was that engine, Charlie Wilson, the chairman of General Motors, her Orchard Lake Country Club cards and golf partner was his daughter-in-law. And so like we didn't get when my mom married my dad, she told her, don't ever expect me to babysit the kids or whatever. Like literally the minute she was about to walk down the aisle. And so they just never got along. And so it's the same thing. Like even though they lived close, like we didn't really have a great relationship with them. And then I had a great relationship with my Indiana grandparents. I didn't know any of their family. It's the same thing. It's like everybody has all these odd deaths, and this person dropped, dead in the field, and a meteor hit them, and this person, drowned in the well, and I mean, it's just like all these ridiculous stories, and the so putting it together is interesting, but that Indiana group, that's the dullest group. That's where John Watson Foster's that's where John Watson Foster grew up, in Petersburg, Indiana. Again, it's farm country. It just seems non sequitur, but that is where the Secretary of State of the United States grew up, on that farm, and his grandchildren became very important. His great grandchild is a key bridge between this Vatican intelligence network with Avery Dulles, because and again, the story is ridiculous. You've got, the Dulles, oh, we're the big Calvinists and we're pre-selective, and my dad is the, Auburn seminary leader, and we're these strong Presbyterians. And now the nephew is the cardinal, the Catholic cardinal. It's like, it's ridiculous.
Yes, and someone pointed out yesterday on Twitter the connection between the Dulles and I think it's the American Theological Seminary, which brings together different faiths, and that's a lead that someone might want to follow. How Dulles and the Catholics went together. But let's spend a moment while we have a few. Let's see, we got 8 minutes left. We've talked about. Oh, I did want to ask you about Seligman, Colorado.
Okay.
Seligman, Colorado. Is that named after one of the Seligmans you're talking about?
So I'd have to look at the Colorado. I'm sure it is, because
Yeah.
he was he was a power financer, but he was also involved in the 19th century's most famous anti-Semitic incident. He was rejected from the Saratoga Springs hotel. And again, if you get into that backstory, there's a lot of meat in the backstory between that incident, but that was played up as the America's great anti-Semitic moment. And then the wealthy elite Jews were then offered the opportunity to buy Adirondack cottages. And one of the cottages is this Knollwood, and that's where Lewis Marshall, and who married Untermeyer's first cousin, by the way. He was in there with Daniel Guggenheim, Lewis Marsh, or Eugene Mayer's sister, and then her husband, who was the head of Lazard Frere. They all had the same cottage, and that was the same Lake Saranac, where they're right next to the Trudeau Sanitarium, which was a tuberculosis clinic. And that was where, when my great grandpa died in the ditch in the car crash, my grandpa, the same one that we didn't have a good relationship with, that I think is the angel probably that had to play a very hard role. He ingested a peanut, collapsed his lung as a 14-year-old, and was sent to live in an iron lung in the Trudeau Sanitarium for 2 years. For his age 14 and 15, he lived next to Camp Knollwood, where Lewis Marshall was. And of course, how intriguing that his father, the mom, blamed Henry Ford, the same person that they had the Dearborn Independent, where they were coming from New York, Lewis Marshall. That's why it's so incredible to me. And then Lewis Marshall was also the person that did the migration bird treaties, which I do think is used in disease surveillance and weather, climate change, all these things. I feel like the bird migration treaties are a foundation piece of those topics.
Wow, it'd be interesting to ask Adam Finnegan about how the bird migration treaty might fit in with the weaponization of viruses that are carried by birds from South America up here and everywhere else. But now the Catholics side of it, and we'll wrap it up. Geez, this whole 10/2 comes in just in time for them to keep Operation Paperclip covered up, as well as to proceed with MK Ultra and all of the other MK craziness that they did. The keeping Paperclip covered up is keeping the Vatican happy. It's keeping the rat lines unknown or suspicious, but not able to prove. It's a method that it arises out of the fact that they couldn't afford to let the American people know about Operation Paperclip, or we would raise bloody hell. And the American people are now, I think we've been molded into kind of a very submissive people through all of these techniques that they've used. So that even if we saw, and they're starting to let us see, the real dark side of our government, we'd probably just sit back and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. that is the greatest achievement that they could possibly hope for, and I'm afraid we're getting close to it. So thank you so much for helping me unfold a lot of these mysteries to most people. It's great work. I enjoy working with you so much, and I've got another minute or two if you'd like to add anything else.
Yeah, I think that I mean, if as long as we're talking about the Catholic Church, I think the Father Coughlin story is really important, and that, of course, is another personal one because he was originally put on WJR, which was the Jewett brothers that had the Page Detroit Auto Company that started WJR. They put Coughlin on the radio, and then, of course, they also had the Lee DeForest vacuum tube patents that were became a very hot issue with RCA, with David Sarnoff, and with Joseph Kennedy, of course, with RKO Pictures. The sound to film technology is also involved in that, and then of course the people that Coughlin turns um, on the New Deal and on an FDR and is cited as being anti-Semitic. And the people that are sent to get him off the air are Frank Murphy, who was the mayor of Detroit during the collapse. Hal Roosevelt was his controller of the city. Hal Roosevelt was the roommate at Groton of Sumner Wells, and he was also best friends with Averell Harriman. Was Hal Roosevelt's best friend. So you've got a lot. So when Henry Ford is playing poker or whatever with um, FDR, that doesn't shock me at all because Henry Ford and Edsel were the ones that let the Union Guardian Bank collapse so that they could bring in the 1933 Emergency Banking Act. They rebooted the Trading with the Enemy, 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. That was the Emergency Banking Act. Then they made the 1933 Banking Act, the Glass-Steagall Act. That was the final, resolution. And then then when Coughlin was calling this a fascist arrangement, as far as the federal government, New Deal um, government organizations partnering with private industry to grow during out of a depression. They sent Joe Kennedy, they sent Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII. They sent Francis Spellman after and FDR uh, after Coughlin. So what I think is there's something with the vacuum tube, with the radio transmissions, and it's going to tie into the Marconi scandal and Marconi and RCA. And it's also because the person that did the translations for the original Vatican radio was Spellman. He was in Italy at that time, and he was the one that did those translations. So you have all these intrigues with the Kennedy family, the Spellmans, the Roosevelts. Of course, the Joe and Jimmy Roosevelt were very close. And then, of course, much later in the 70s, you have International Overseas Services, and that was the company that was started by Bernie Kornfeld. He hired Jimmy Roosevelt to be his assistant, and then a man named Robert Vesco took over the IOS. Roosevelt stays on. Vesco was the person that Bill Casey and the Mitchell, the John Mitchell, were investigating with the contributions to the campaign to reelect the president. The 200,000 from Vesco was one of the intrigues of the Watergate scandal, and then of course Adnan Khashoggi was the 200 million. Like we're talking about the $200,000 donation that Robert Vesco, who was partnered with Donald Nixon, the president's nephew, and we're going to talk about this $200,000 contribution, but we're not going to talk about the 200 million that Adnan Khashoggi chips in, and of course that is right at the beginning of the Safari Club, the BCCI Bank, and McDuff's rival is
George
helping.
P. George
George
P.
P.
Schultz.
Schultz is in the middle of the petrodollar um, negotiations. He's using his skills that he learned from Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago School of Economics. He's applying this to OPEC and to petroleum policy, and he is making petroleum the asset that backs the reserve currency of the world. It was a big deal.
Well, that's about 10 topics I'd like to jump in more on with you, David, and I hope that we will in future broadcasts. And it's just an amazing journey to be traveling with you, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks everyone for being with us today. Think about it, and just jot a note to your congressman, put it in an email or something, and say, what about this 10/2 plausible deniability? Do we really need that? Can we just get rid of that and let the American people see what's really going on for once in our lives? All right. Thank you very much again. Everybody have a great afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow for our usual Friday chat. My wife, Marcia, will join me and you, and we can talk about whatever's on your mind. Thank you again. We'll see you then.